who had left the flash drive on Traoré's desk. The palace security cameras showed nothing when he curiously opened it. A French document appeared on the screen. Operation Eclipse Traoré threat analysis. The sentences he read would change the fate of all Africa. Ibrahim Traoré stared at the small flash drive lying on his desk. It was an ordinary black device, unmarked and innocuous, yet its presence in his private office inside the presidential palace of Burkina Faso was deeply concerning. Who had left it there, and how had they bypassed the extensive security protocols? Konate. He called to his security chief, who stood by the door. Check the surveillance footage. I want to know who entered my office in the last 24 hours. Colonel Amara Konate, a veteran with piercing eyes that Miss Ednathan nodded sharply. Right away. President. As Konate left, Traoré contemplated the flash drive. The rational response would be to have it analyzed by cybersecurity experts before opening it, a standard procedure for unexpected electronic devices that might contain malware, but something about its deliberate placement in the center of his desk perfectly aligned with his notebook suggested this was an ordinary security threat. After several minutes of consideration, Traoré made his decision. He connected the flash drive to an isolated laptop kept specifically for security purposes, one with no network connection and minimal software. If this was a cyber attack, the damage would be contained. The drive contained a labeled Eclipse. Inside was a PDF file titled Operation Eclipse Traoré Threat Analysis. The document was in French with official French Foreign Ministry letterhead classification marks and what appeared to be authentic digital signatures. Traoré's rate quickened as he began to read. Top secret, eyes only, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of France, Directorate of Strategic Affairs and Security. Date March 17, 2023. Subject: Operation Eclipse, Neutralization Strategy for Burkina Faso. Overview of the rapid consolidation of power by Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso represents an unprecedented threat to French strategic interests in West Africa. Unlike his predecessors, Traoré has demonstrated both the ability and determination to fundamentally restrict Burkina Faso's relationship with France, particularly regarding mineral resources, military cooperation, and regional influence. Threat assessment in Ligon indicates Traoré is actively working to nationalize French-owned mining operations, particularly gold and recently discovered lithium deposits, to military cooperation agreements that provide France with strategic positioning in the Sahel, establish an African resources coalition with Mali, Niger, and potentially Guinea to collectively renegotiate terms with Western powers for develop alternative financial structures to reduce dependency on the CFA francs. Most concerning is the contagion effects Traoré's policies are having on neighboring countries. Polling data shows alarming increases in anti-French sentiment across former colonies, with Traoré emerging as a symbolic figure of African resource sovereignty. Directive: Operation Eclipse is hereby authorized to neutralize the Traoré threat through multiple vectors. Phase 1: Economic pressure, freeze all Burkinabe government assets in French financial institutions, coordinating with international financial institutions to suspend lending programs, active business intelligence network to withdraw investments simultaneously. Economic shock. Phase 2: Political destabilization, level relationship with opposition figures. See Appendix. A 4-asset list: amplified tribal and religious divisions through media operations to Pofana warfare units to attribute economic hardships. Traoré's policies. Phase 3: Military contingency. Prepare special operations units for targeted extraction or neutralization. Authorization pending. Support loyal military elements for potential stabilization. Operation. Appendix B. Position: aerial assets for open deployment if necessary. Timberland employment to begin immediate. Batalita must be neutralized within 90 days. Bore his African resources coalition can be formalized if unsuccessful. ACOM models predict loss of exclusive access to West African resources valued at 17.4 billion annually. Authorization approved by National Security Council meeting for 7 by Minister of Foreign Affairs. Signature: Director of Foreign Intelligence. And all communications regarding Operation Eclipse must be conducted through secure channels. Only these operations' existence is denied at all classification levels. As Traoré finished, Adrian, a cold sensation spread through his body. He had suspected French interference, but the clinical detachment with which his removal was discussed, as if he were merely an obstacle to Torsor's extraction rather than Thelador of a sovereign nation, filled him with both rage and determination. His suspicions about France's continued neo-colonial ambitions had just been confirmed in the most explicit way possible. But questions remained: who had leaked this document and why the derupant? As Colonel cannot returned his expression troubled. Mr. President, we have reviewed the security footage. No one entered your office in the past 24 hours. Authorized personnel. However, there is a 3-minute gap in the recording between 2:14 and 2:17 a.m. A gap. Explain. It appears professional, sir, not a technical glitch. Someone with access to our security systems deliberately that window. Traoré nodded slowly. So, our mysterious informant has access to both French intelligence documents and palace security systems. That narrows the possibilities considerably. There's something else, Sir Kennedy said, hesitating. Minister Dio has been attempting to reach you urgently. He says French ambassador is requesting an immediate meeting regarding concerning developments in bilateral relations. Traoré smiled grimly. I imagine he has hidden the laptop screen toward Kennedy. It seems we're on a timeline according to This we have less than 90 days before France attempts to remove me from power. Eyes widened as he scanned the document. Sir, this is an act of war, no colonel. This is colonialism rebranded as strategic interest. Traoré stood his decision. Made assemble the security council immediately and contact the leaders of Mali, Niger, Guinea and Tacoth timeline for our African Resource Coalition just accelerated as Kenneth left to carry out his orders. Traoré turned to the document studying the list of assets in appendix. Several names were highlighted, members of his own cabinet, military officers, tribal leaders, people France believed could be leveraged against him. One name in particular caught his attention: Marcel Dubois, cultural attaché at the French embassy. Except Traoré knew from military intelligence briefings that Dubois was actually DGSSE, French Foreign Intelligence. The document listed him as primary operational coordinator, a plan began forming in Traoré's mind within house. The presidential palace wastrons formed into a crisis command center. Security had been heightened and trusted units positioned at strategic locations throughout the capital. The Security Council, comprising military leaders, key ministers and intelligence officials, gathered in the secure conference room. The document, APIS authentic, confirmed defense minister. After expert analysis, digital signatures match known French officials and the formatting is consistent with their classified documentation. How do we respond? Mr. President asked Foreign Minister Urigoa. Formal protest to Paris would reveal a source. Traoré paced the room considering his options. We don't protest, we prepare and we act. He turned to facilitate his council. France has operated in the shadows for decades, maintaining the illusion of African independence while controlling our resources and governments. It's time we brought their more thoughts into the light. He outlined his strategy, a bold three-part plan to counter each phase of Operation Eclipse. Instead of reacting defensively to their economic pressure, will preemptively support our financial system. Effective immediately, we're transferring foreign reserves from French banks to a distributed network across Asian and Middle Eastern institutions. Minister by Naz, you have 48 hours. The finance minister nodded, though his expression revealed concern about the ambitious timeline. Second, we accelerate the African Resources Coalition not in 90 days but in 30. I've already spoken with President Guido of Mali and President Tony of Niger. They're facing similar pressures and are ready to formalize our readiness immediately. Murmurs of approval spread through the room. The coalition had been in planning for months, but this crisis created the urgency needed to overcome bureaucratic obstacles. Finally, Traoré continued, his voice hardening, we neutralized their assets. Colonel Kate will lead a counterintelligence operation to identify and monitor every individual named in this document. We won't arrest them yet, we'll feed them, control it, inform and creating confusion in French intelligence circles. And what about the French embassy personnel coordinating this operation? Asked Kate, a cold smile across Traoré's face. We invite them to dinner. 2 nights later, the presidential bus hosted a diplomatic reception celebrating Franco-Burkinabe cultural cooperation. The real purpose was far different. Marcel Dubois, the cultural attaché whose name appeared in the leaked document, accepted his invitation eagerly, a perfect opportunity to assess the situation and potentially meet with French assets in the Burkinabe government. What he didn't expect was to be seated directly beside President Traoré himself. Monsieur Dubois. Traoré greeted him warmly as if they were old friends. I've been meaning to discuss your excellent cultural exchange program. We understand you've been particularly active in our military regions. Dubois maintained his composure, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. More President, I go where French culture has the most impact. Your military officers appreciate our language training. Indeed, Traoré replied, taking a sip of water. Language is so important, isn't it? I've been practicing me French lately. In fact, I recently learned some new phrases. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Operation Eclipse, for instance. A fascinating term, wouldn't you agree? Thecla drained from Dubois's face. Another interesting phrase. Traoré continued, is primary operational coordinator, an impressive title. Dubois blessed his napkin on the table, preparing to leave. Mr. President, I'm not sure what you're implying, but please enjoy your meal. Traoré interrupted, his smile never wavering. We have much to discuss about cultural cooperation, for instance. I'm particularly interested in French cultural attitudes toward national sovereignty. Throughout dinner, Traoré continued his psychological operation, dropping precise details from the classified document into seeming innocent conversation. By dessert, Dubois was visibly shaken, excusing himself early with claims of sudden illness. As the French operative hurried from the place, Traoré nodded to Connate, who discreetly followed. They didn't need to arrest or expel Dubois. His panic would do more damage to French operations than his absence. He would report back that their operation was compromised, throwing their intelligence networks into chaos. They tried to identify the leak. The next morning, Traoré addressed the nation in a televised broadcast that was deliberately not announced in advance to foreign media. Citizens of Burkina Faso, began his expression solemn. For too long our nation has lived under the illusion of independence, while foreign powers continued to control our resources, our economy, and even all political leadership. Without directly mentioning the leaked document, he announced a series of sweeping measures: formation of the African Resources Coalition with Mali, Niger, Guinea and Togo, the establishment of a new regional currency backed by gold reserves there, and of all mining contracts and the creation of a sovereign economy and free from Western financial controls. The path ahead will not be easy. Acknowledged those who have profited from Africa's exploitation will not surrender their privileges without resistance. We must be prepared for economic pressure, political attacks, and even threats to our security. What headed next would be remembered as the moment that transformed not just Burkina Faso but potentially the entire post-colonial relationship between Africa and the West to those foreign powers who believe they can determine Africa's future from comfortable offices in distant capitals. Your time has passed, Weezy. Your operations, we know your Bensu. Understand your methods. Africa is no longer your resource depot, your strategic backyard, or your geopolitical Elandra. International reaction was immediate and polarized. Western media outlets characterized Traoré's speech as inflammatory, destabilizing, and potentially harmful to international corridor. African media, however, reported unprecedented scenes of public support across multiple countries. In Paris, an emergency cabinet meeting was convened. The French foreign minister faced difficult questions. How had a highly classified operation been compromised? Why was Burkina Faso suddenly coordinating so effectively with neighboring countries? Most pressingly, how should France respond? Tohat amounted to a direct challenge to its influence in West Africa over Thefalo in weeks. The situation is, as predicted in the LICO document, France froze Burkina Faso suddenly. To discover most had already been moved. International financial institutions announced the routine review of lending programs to Burkina Faso and its coalition partners, but financing had already been secured through BRICS nations. The most dramatic development came 30 days after Traoré discovered the flash drive on his desk. In a ceremony in Ouagadougou attended by the leaders of Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, and observers from a dozen other African nations, the African Resources Coalition was formally established. The treaty included mutual defense provisions, collective resource negotiation protocols, and most significantly, a framework for a new regional currency backed by gold, lithium, and other strategic minerals. Traoré standing bare, the assembled leaders held up a gold coin, the first minted prototype of new currency. This represents more than economic policy. He declared it represents the principle that what belongs to Africa's people. The ceremony was broadcast live across the continent, watched by millions in European and American policy circles. Analysts scrambled to assess the implications. The coordinated move by these resource-rich nations potentially shifted the global economic balance in ways that had been considered theoretic but never before attempted at this scale. In the following months, Phase 2 of Operation Eclipse was attempted. As predicted, Burkina Faso ligands, now hypervigilant and supported by coalition partners, identified and neutralized multiple destabilization efforts. Media campaigns attempting to inflame ethnic tensions were countered with targeted messaging about unity and sovereignty. Most importantly, the cabinet members and military officers identified as in the leaked document found themselves isolated and ineffective. If their communications monitored, their influence diminished. Perhaps most surprisingly to Western observers, the coalition counts economies didn't collapse under pressure while there were undeniable hardships, inflation, spikes, supply chain disruptions, and foreign investment flight. The coordinated pro and resource-backed currency provide a degree of insulation from external pressure. The predicted economic collapse that would drive popular Traoré's government never materialized. 6 months after the flash drive appeared on his desk, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the opening ceremony of Burkina Faso's first wholly owned lithium processing facility. The project, financed by the coalition's joint development fund, represented the practical implementation of the resource of avidity he had championed. As workers raised the Burkina flag over the facility, a secure message arrived on Traoré's phone from military intelligence. They had finally identified source of the leaked French documentary. Demp, a mid-level analyst in the French Foreign Ministry's African Affairs Division, had been quietly copying classified documents related to Toniok colonial policies for months. Half Senegalese through her mother, DMP had become increasingly disturbed by the disconnect between France's public statements about African partnership and its actual strategic planning. She had leveraged her relationship with a French security contractor working on the presidential palace's surveillance system in Burkina Faso to create the brief window needed to deliver the flash drive. Both were now seeking asylum in a coalition country. Traoré smiled as he read the report. He had suspected someone with conscience within the French system. The coordination with the security contractor explained how the flash drive had appeared so mysteriously that vending in a private message transmitted raw secure channels. He granted both Dawn and her accomplice immediate asylum and protection. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful weapons against imperial power weren't armies or resources but truth and the 1 year to the day after its discovery of the flash drive, leaders from 27 African nations gathered in Ouagadougou. What had begun as a defensive coalition of 5 countries had evolved into a continent-wide movement for resource sovereignty. The African Resource Protection Act being signed established collective principles for dealing with foreign investment, resource development, and financial independence. In his address to the assembled legislature, held up a small black flash-driven it. The original but a symbolic replica small device changed the course of our continent, he said, not through technology but through truth. It revealed what we already knew. in our hearts that true independence remains unfinished business in Africa, that those who own us through force now seek to control us through finance, through source extraction, through puppet. He placed the flash drive in a small display case that would remain in the headquarters of the new African Economic Cooperation Council. This reminds us that empire never truly retreats, it merely changes form. Our vigilance must be eternal, our solidarity and our commitment to true independence unwavering. In Paris 8.